Good evening and welcome to WANA Live, the reading series of the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia. I'm your host, Damian Dressick, and here's your substitute host, Michael Dittman.
Hey, good evening, Damian, and everybody out there.
So our regular, for those of you who are regular viewers, Christina is actually at Penn West, California right now, showing a film that deals with the steel industry. So she's unfortunately able to be here, but we've got, I think, an excellent pinch hitting co-host. I'm really excited to work with Mike. He and I have talked together, and he's a terrific guy. I'm looking forward to the insightful things he will bring to the conversation about the fiction of our guest. And welcome. We've had our long summer break. We're back now. We've got a schedule of folks coming up. We've got some wonderful new writers for the fall. We're also going to visit with some old friends. So our writer tonight is from Katanning, Pennsylvania, right here in the dead center of northern Appalachia. Jolene McIlwain. She is the author of SIDLE CREEK. This is from Melville House. It's her debut story collection. It has garnered really wonderful praise, really good reviews. Her work has appeared also in West Branch, the Florida Review, Cincinnati Review, New Orleans Review, the Northern Apple Review, and has also been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. She's been a finalist for Glimmer Train and River Styx's contest, and she was a semifinalist in Nimrod's Katherine and Porter Prize. And she's also taught at Duquesne and Chatham. So let's bring out Jolene. Good evening.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
We are so pleased that you were able to make time to do this. I'm really looking forward to hearing your work.
So I'll get started. I'm going to be reading.
All right. So Michael and I are going to disappear, and we'll pop back.
Okay, sounds great. So one of the stories I'm going to be reading tonight is called Sanudo, and it originally appeared in Litro magazine in the UK. Sanudo. There was this section of Dvorak's Symphony No. 9 he could play. A little piano riff from the Largo movement he'd kick out when he thought about that woman he knew he shouldn't think about at his real job. He feared there he might hurt someone, hurt something, might lose his job for being distracted, messing up. But here at his other job, long after all happy hours suits left, when the regulars were keeping their heads down, when Cubby was counting money and glasses and filling coaster holders, and right before last call, he played it. It felt right then. It felt like a crown royal rim licked wet. They had met in the hallway of this place when he was much younger, and she was broken, a waft of warm whiskey. She fell onto him like sound itself, continued to strike him for 3 months like a felt hammer, soft and hard. She was both strings and percussion. He knew he didn't love her. He loved his wife, the woman having daughter after daughter, the woman filled with milk and kindness, open eyes and smile, his soft petal, his una corda. But lately, and for some time now, he's considered it may have been the only time he really felt love. What he lived before and after her with his wife and daughters was commitment, a completely different pedal, different effect, different sound altogether. Love with this woman he met in the hallway offered more octaves, hidden extra keys below hinged lids. Since those nights when this woman taught him about another place where sorrow was sharp and laughter was insanely regular and movement between emotions so quick and surprising it left him spent, he had to learn to shift back to his life, his place, his contract with level responsibility. And with this move, he'd grown closed and heavy, burdened with life, a home full of girls who became women, wives, mothers, and then slowly and quickly left him. His wife fretted over the dotted harlequin bugs on their cauliflower plants, the hairline faults of their plastered ceiling, so he scraped off the black and white eggs lined up like little keys on the undersides of leaves he spackled. But he allowed a small spot for this woman he'd met in the hallway, It was just that lately the memory of her broke through that place where it was tucked safely in his head. She poured out of him somewhere above his ear, left a gaping hole there his wife was sure to notice again. He was becoming reckless with despair, restoring jacks and hammers, capstans, screws. Those broken pianos reminded him too often of her, this unsteady, steady woman who made him liquid and tender. His wife's name drew him in first. Her father, his instructor, mentioned her one day as he practiced Chopin's Prelude number 7, A major. Octava was 19. He was 21. After their first date, tickets her father could not use to the symphony, they played chopsticks, her fingers stumbling over the keys, the side of her arm barely brushing the side of his. She'll be your metronome, her father had said, toasting them at their wedding. Just a few weeks into it with this woman in the hallway, his wife found out. She said she understood. She said she'd allow him to leave her if that's what he needed, but he stayed. Left playing piano at the bar every night and took on 2 jobs, one tuning and repairing uprights and grands, and one cleaning long hallways of the music hall with a mop and rolling bucket of gray water. He made enough money to take good care of his wife, his girls, and still played just one night a month, only for tips. She allowed him this reluctantly. And so, once a month, he remembers when he fell in love, when he just played piano. And the woman? She sweats his drink, slides beside wispy sheets of music, waves around his head, a sound riding on perpetual sustain. And when he's done, when he's had enough, he walks home, unlocks the door, and finds his way back to his bed, his wife, and lays this open spot of his head on the pillow. And the second one that I'll read actually came out. It was one of my first stories that was published, and it came out in the Fourth River through Chatham University. And it's called Seed to Fool. And it's another piece that's based on a workplace. This one's a little different than a piano playing man. Seed to Fool. After you've felled the tree and dragged it from the site and hauled it to the mill, one of the first things you do is scale it, measure to find out how many board feet it can yield. Always measure the small end. According to the Vermont log rule, a log with a diameter of 11 inches cut into 9-foot length offers up about 45 board feet. One that's 36 inches in diameter, same length, should yield 486 board feet. Then you have to grade it. Check for knots and branch stubs, seams with ingrown bark, ring-shaped gum spots in black cherry. I started to teach our daughter Myra how to grade and scale, and she's shown promise. She has a head for numbers, for recall. We've had this business for 35 years. My father sought out permission from the bishop to start up before I was born, and he's been milling every season since. Now I'm sawyer, and he is more known for his work as a hammerman or sawsmith, fixing our saws and those of nearby mills, Amish and English. Myra's interest lies more in his job. By the time she was 4, she knew the difference between a cross peen, a twist face, and a dog head. She knew how to measure blade tension and dishing when she was only 8. It comes natural to her to write things. She doesn't even flinch when he pounds out the saws. Then there's the saw kerf, the width of cut made by the saw. That loss has to be factored in too. I can tell you exactly what each cut will do. I can tell you what type of cut is best for each kind of job. Quarter sawn, rift sawn, flat sawn. I can tell you the type of wood or how wet it is by the sound it makes when it meets the blade. What I can't tell you is how much my wife Hannah's been hurt by how I've cut her, or how wide the kerf is that I've laid upon her heart. When you marry, Scripture says you're joined together, but in truth, to do that, you have to be cut away from your family. You cut away from yourself. These cuts are necessary. But I've done more than that. I've given her another seed that wouldn't grow. My wife Hannah is like a quarter sawn board, the kind that's best for flooring or treads or stairs. It's stable, Doesn't easily produce slivers, warp, or cup like flat-sawn would. Flat-sawn's best only for visual appeal, like my eldest brother's wife. Rift-sawn's the worst cut of all, like my mother-in-law. That's why it was so hard to take when Hannah slammed the screen door on me after I showed her the casket. I'd build it straight and true from wood I'd myself sanded and stained, rubbed with linseed until my hands were raw. Too small, she whispered, only that. But little Daniel fit into it easily despite the thick blanket she'd wrapped him in. Perhaps she thought her love for him might somehow expand his small body, might help him to continue his growth, even underground. It's 31.5 by 13.25 by 11 inches, I said, as if to convince her. Myra stood at my side. Hannah just stared at us and shook her head back and forth and back again and again. I used poplar, known for its straight grain, uniformity of texture, its light weight, though that never mattered, for when I carried what I'd made to the grave, my boy inside my box, I could barely find the strength. I thought Hannah would be pleased. She'd been the one to find the small stand of poplars near SIDLE Creek. She used to go there and lie on the ground beside the creek, the swell of our sun part of her silhouette, and twirl their tulip-shaped leaves round her second finger and search the tops of the trees to spot their blossoms. But she didn't even touch the box. Turned her head when I told her it was cherry stain I'd used. She'd have none of it.
Mike.
Yeah. Jolene, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Wow. Very enjoyable. And I'm so glad you read See the Fool. Even it's an earlier piece, because about sort of the way that you write. And that I read an interview recently where you were quoting a writer who I can't remember, about how so much of Appalachian writing is an obituary.
Yeah.
And you wanted to get away from that.
Idra Novi.
And
yeah,
then,
she's.
Yes. Thank you. Got a mind like a sieve. And I was wondering whether you see yourself, Appalachian writing is so sort of having a moment right now. And you do write in a very different, beautiful way from what's come before. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that in terms of, your goals and where you think that wonderful, strong, beautiful voice comes from. Because, you do have super dark stories in this collection. Like, nobody's saying dogfighting is super happy, but in the same way.
No, it's dark. Yeah, it's a heavy collection for sure. Yeah, and my agent and I discussed that at length, that it was pretty dark. But I will say this, that I think that I tried my best to insert into the stories as much as I could this feeling that maybe there's hope beyond what we normally think of when we think of Appalachia and the kind of people that live here. Unfortunately, what we see on TV are mining accidents and people rallying together and helping each other, or we see the blight, we see these horrible situations of small town life just becoming people living in ghost towns, or even, infighting and hurting each other. And that all happens. It happens here. It happens in the cities. It happens in the suburbs. But for whatever reason, it seems to be that the media does put that message out there about us. So I did want to make sure that in my stories, there's a sense of hope and a sense of connection. Because I think that that's the thing that I thought about a lot when I was putting the collection together initially, but then thought about it extremely in an extreme way, because when we were sending it out, it was during, the lockdown and the pandemic. And so I really was more aware, even more than ever, that these connections we have with our neighbors are so important to who we are and what we believe about the world. Another thing that I did try to do too, though, is I come from a working class, I guess, sort of working poor background, really. My dad was a Teamster truck driver and my mom was a rural letter carrier. And I'm now married to an excavator. So we're still in that working class kind of situation. And I just found that, a long time ago, I remember when I worked at a hospital, I was an X-ray tech. I remember seeing that the working class language could be so melodic and beautiful and poetic, really. And especially in the hospital situation, you have these beautiful Latin words like hysterosalpingogram or carcinogens or, melanoma. They sound so beautiful for these horrible things. But also in the workplace, the beauty of listening to someone who's a sawyer talk about wood really appealed to me. And I didn't see as much of it in fiction as I would have liked. I studied poetry first initially. I would see it a lot with poets, but not as much with fiction writers as I would have liked to have seen, especially about working class people. So that was my goal, to get the words out there, these beautiful words that we use every day, but we don't really, really highlight like we should. So those were my goals for the writing.
Is that where, and I'm sorry, Damien, I'll give you a chance to talk here too, but is that where U4R1 comes from too, that that desire to show community and also sort of embracing the language, especially of women, because even though you have tons of male characters in this text, but not all of them are the sort of toxic masculinity that we're used to seeing when we're talking about Appalachia.
Right.
So is that where something like U4R1, can you talk about how that came about a little bit? Because that's a great, fantastic story.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, U4R1 was one of the last ones I wrote, and I definitely wanted to put the language of medicine in that story so that the stigma was sort of broken, that we can't talk about women's issues, But I also feel that I'm glad you mentioned the thing about toxic masculinity. It's no surprise to me that the stories that I wrote were about men, because at the time I wrote them, when I started writing them, my dad had suffered a massive stroke. And he was 73 years old, and my son was starting kindergarten. So I was watching my dad, lose his ability to have this sort of virile manliness that he was used to having his whole life, and had to really ask for a lot of help. And my son was trying to sort of strike out on his own and become this little man that everybody thinks he should be, right? And so I really watched both of them. I watched my husband and my brother sort of navigate these really interesting ways of moving through the world. And especially in a small town in a rural area, there are a lot of stereotypes about men being quiet or being violent or being just, there are stereotypes everywhere about men, but especially I found that the ones I was dealing with when my father and my son were going through these transitional periods in their lives was very interesting to me. So that showed up all through my stories, of course.
To their credit.
But U4R1, we definitely wanted to get that story in the book because it's probably one of the most hopeful pieces.
Yeah.
And I was glad about that being included. So
yeah, it's nice because the collection, like we said, some of them are so dark, it can get a little overwhelming. And then you have a story like that that's so beautiful. It's such a little jewel box of a story, and I don't mean that in a negative way at all. It's so perfect and so uplifting to read. It sort of gives you a break from those darker things, which need to be said as well. Yeah,
putting the collection together, like the order of the stories became really important because of those darker themes. It was hard to find, some relief. But I think that, I think if you look closely, you can find the relief, but I do think that sometimes whenever we talk about dark stories or heavy subjects, I don't want it to be melodramatic. So I tried to steer away from melodrama. There are a couple that kind of teeter on that edge, but for the most part, I wanted the ways that I rendered these situations that are really difficult situations, I wanted them to be very realistic so that they didn't go into that kind of zone of melodrama. And that's where sort of the nature metaphors came in and helped me quite a bit. But it was hard. It was a hard book to write. It was a hard book to think about, but I'm so glad it's out there. I hope it helps people, to take a closer look at their neighbors, take a closer look at themselves, and see what we are doing to help and harm each other.
Yeah, 100%.
I could not be more pleased to have you as our kickoff reader for the fall.
Oh, thank you.
That work was so wonderful. We have a comment from we have several comments, but one of them is from Earl Keener, and he says, "Excellent, erases the imagined border between poetry and prose." And that was one of the things that I was thinking this in my notes, and it's great to see somebody else kind of. Oh yeah, I felt like this. We were talking about Flash before, kind of in the green room, and I was just listening to Bobby Shepard talk at AWP, and people were asking him about the difference. He said, well, prose poetry, the language is what's front and center, and flash fiction, it's the plot that's front and center. And I think I was thinking, wow, you've got this wonderfully incandescent language. It's so impressive, so tight. And I love the plots, but also these pieces feel so conceptually. I'm very rarely envious, and I'm like, wow, these are tight. I mean, these are wired tight. They're wonderful, wonderful pieces. I could not be more impressed. It's such wonderful work.
Oh, thank you so much. I am such a failed poet. I have to tell you, that's where I started. I studied Jane Kenyon, Gregory Orr, Joyce Pesroff, Alice Madison, all these wonderful poets that write about nature and other things. And I'm a terribly failed poet. It's horrible.
Me too.
But I really, like, if you look at the books on my shelf, most of them are poetry, really. I mean, I love it. I just can't do it very well.
Yeah,
so I try to infuse as much as I can of the melody of words in my prose. So thank you so much for saying that, but I don't feel I'm very good at it at all.
Oh no, yeah, no. I mean, I think I don't know I don't know about your poetry. I can't. But no, I had the same. I was supposed to be. I was accepted to Brooklyn College to study with Allen Ginsberg, and then I kind of took some time off. I looked at my poetry again, and I think Mr. Ginsberg has better things to do with his time than help me. I'm sure he could eat. He can ride the train all night, and probably no matter what. But no, I love the way you bring this poetic sensibility, and there's a wonderful competence, a quietness to linguistic perfection. It's not showy, it's not flashy, but it's really on point. Everything feels so carefully selected.
That's drumming. I mean, I thought you were going to read drumming tonight. I'll be honest, because it's just such a, like Damien saying, such a compact, tight, and just so many layers of meaning and this beautiful language as you go through it. And I know you're doing a lot of readings, to support this. So how do people respond? I mean, do you ever read drumming?
Yes, I've read drumming a lot. That story is a really interesting story because it's the story that got me my agent. I worked for so long. I started looking for an agent back in 2012 and, did the thing we all do, right? I heard crickets for a really long time. I just kept pushing and knocking on doors and nothing was happening. And then unbelievably, Cincinnati Review picked up that story in their micro series.
Right.
And they are so supportive of writers. I just can't say enough about Cincinnati Review. But when it was on their site, not long after it came out, a few weeks, my now agent had contacted them and asked if she could contact me through them. And I was shocked, because I didn't know. I mean, you hear about agents contacting people through, literary journals, but I didn't think it was going to happen to me, and it couldn't have been a better match. I mean, I had a couple stories that agents had contacted me through their literary journals, but this one, Nicole Cunningham at the book group, was amazing. And she loved drumming. And for a lot of the things that you're saying, about it, it's so compact and it shows this connection between people. But it also shows, the difficulty of life and the darkness and the heaviness that goes with infertility, but also with, in that story, child abuse as well. So, but I was really lucky with that story. So I can't say enough about that one. That's I think a lot of it.
It's really a showpiece.
So we've also got comments from Karen Wyatt, is a regular viewer. It's such rich details. I feel like I am there in this story. Jerry is saying, first story, the placement is felt, and by the ending, there is sorrow and wistfulness and compassion and disappointment. Really good job. And second story, very visual, words made to be read out loud, a spontaneous voice, real storytelling. And Bart, another regular viewer, good writing, compelling stories.
Oh my, thank you all so much. That means so much to me.
All right. Well, thank you so much for making time to be on the show. We really appreciate it. We love your work. Would you mind holding the book up again so everybody could?
Oh, sure. There it is.
All right. SIDLE CREEK. And where can people find this?
Anywhere books are sold. Your independent bookstores would be great. But anywhere books are sold, and of course on Kindle as well. But I am just really, really happy to be here and say hi to your daughter, Damien, because it was wonderful meeting her at the reading. And thank you so much for both your wonderful questions and your wonderful comments. It means the world to me. I can't tell you how much.
Well, thank you. All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We're really glad that you were able to come and hear our wonderful reader this evening. We'll see you next week.